Le ringrazio molto, signora Presidenta, dear members of the Committee of the Regions, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, it's always a pleasure for me to meet the representatives of Europe's regions, and I thank the committee again for inviting me to speak at your plenary session. I think it's, as the President said, a very, very interesting moment to discuss state aid. You just discussed the report on the regional aid guidelines for the new period, 2014-2020, and I think it's an extremely important issue, one of the most important instruments of the legal framework for the control of state aid that we are now modernizing and updating. And I take the opportunity to thank the rapporteur of your opinion, Monsieur Denanot, for his extremely important contribution, which we had the opportunity to discuss bilaterally in Berlaymont, in my office, in early December. And I am happy to note that the opinion you just have discussed broadly supports the spirit of our review. I am also grateful for the many recommendations and ideas that will help us to improve the current draft in the coming weeks and months. The new regional aid guidelines, that is the topic I want to present to you today, but afterwards in the questions and answers we can of course discuss many other issues linked with state aids, but these guidelines will include important substantive changes, including some that are closely linked with the new multi-annual financial framework that, as the President said, we very much hope that will be finally adopted in the coming European Council and hopefully afterwards debated and supported by the European Parliament. As you know, the revision of our regional guidelines are part of our broader state aid modernization strategy. We have tabled proposals included in this strategy last December, the broadband guidelines, the proposals for the changes in the enabling regulation, in the procedural regulation, but our strategic initiative will really take off during this year, and these regional aid guidelines is the first and a very important element of this strategy. What is the rationale behind our modernization strategy? We think that the aftermath of the financial crisis gives us some food for thought, and one of these elements that we need to think, having learned from the crisis experience, is that the public subsidies that promote investment in Europe's less developed areas can make a real difference. This help to investors can support EU governments in their tasks to spend taxpayers' money more wisely and more effectively during a period where most of our budgets at the national level, at the regional level, and also at the European level are undergoing a very serious consolidation constraint. In this respect, the new regional aid guidelines will translate into tangible policies the principles of our modernization strategy. Our guidelines are designed to help member states and public authorities within member states to do more with less, that is, to improve the efficiency and quality of their spending. These guidelines will include increased requirements on the transparency and evaluation of state aid. They will be streamlined and aligned with the EU 2020 strategy objectives, and they will allow us to better focus our review of state subsidies on the cases that have a genuine and significant impact on the internal market. So, our new rules, following these general orientations, need to respond to three main factors. First, that regional disparities in Europe have narrowed in the past decade. These are excellent news because it means that the EU is still a convergence machine. But this convergence only makes it more necessary to concentrate efforts on the poorest regions. Second, obviously come the challenges posed by the crisis. Weaker economies, unemployment and social exclusion, particularly affecting youth unemployment, and the pressure all this puts on public budgets present a challenging list of questions to all of us. And the third factor is the fact that even in this uncertain environment, uncertain economy, some member states still have deep pockets, while others are forced to downsize their support to investors. Looking at this picture, we must modernize our control over government subsidies and align it with the challenges of our times. More than ever, we need to minimize the competition distortions that might be caused by them and leverage private investment. To focus this public support on less developed regions, we propose in our draft guidelines to concentrate the geographical scope of regional aid. We propose a reduction in the maximum permissible levels of aid and a more targeted approach with regards to the type of investments or companies that can receive regional aid. These constraints, I hope, will help Europe's governments to spend better, not to waste the aid, and to focus their efforts to investments that would not take place without the aid and that therefore bring real value added and regional development. I also believe that this policy environment calls for a rebalancing of our enforcement priorities. Therefore, we propose a simple treatment for non-distortive aid and greater attention to the aid that can significantly restrict competition. And finally, the new guidelines will provide better guidance to the authorities in the Member States on how to design and monitor aid measures and policies. This is, in brief, the spirit of our guidelines. Let me now comment more concretely on the changes we propose. The first change I would like to stress is about the overall population coverage, which serves to identify which regions are eligible for regional state aid. I said before that the regional disparities had diminished during the past decade. Now, only about 1 in 4 Europeans live in the least developed regions, compared to 1 in 3 at the time we adopted the current rules in 2005-2006. We were considering, in view of these disparities, to reduce the overall population coverage of these guidelines, but finally I decided, listening to many opinions, to maintain the same percentage of 45% of the EU population. Another important point is deciding how many of the eligible regions are to be predefined at EU level, are assisted regions, and what flexibility is left for Member States to decide on the remaining regions. From a European perspective, the regions most in need are those with a GDP per capita below 75% of the EU average. And the regions which were below 75% have shown economic development but remain below 90% of the EU average will be considered, according to our draft guidelines, also as predefined assisted areas. Similarly, regions with permanent disadvantages, the outermost regions or sparsely populated areas, can also be predefined by the Commission. The remaining population coverage, up to this 45%, will be distributed between Member States according to objective criteria which will take into account both EU and national disparities, and is for national authorities at the level of each Member State to decide on the internal allocation of this part of the population coverage. These national debates on regional policy are indeed important. Sometimes, in my many discussions with stakeholders, I hear requests for the Commission to predefine this or that type of region. My message here is simple. Underdevelopment and permanent disadvantages are recognized at the EU level. For the rest, national debates must take place. Difficult choices had to be made, but I think it's rational to let these difficult choices at the national level to tackle the remaining internal disparities, such as the specific needs of islands, border regions, or other areas with needs of special attention. I believe that our proposal strikes the right balance between the EU-level decisions, on which are the regions most in need, and flexibility for member states to supplement this with national decisions. Sometimes I also hear remarks that the final map of the so-called C regions eligible for state aid under these guidelines and the map of transition regions eligible for structural funds are not identical. Some say this would make cohesion policy and regional aid policy inconsistent. I don't agree with this opinion. Indeed, the maps for the regional aid guideline purposes will not coincide with the maps chosen for the structural funds purposes, as they don't coincide at the present. But this does not mean that there is inconsistency, because cohesion policy and regional aid policy use different instruments. For one thing, only a fraction of structural fund measures takes the form of state aid, as a large part of them, of the resources from structural funds policies, are not used to support directly businesses. And second, state aid measures which are co-financed by structural funds can be assessed and approved by the Commission on the basis of other guidelines, such as those for research, development and innovation, or risk capital, or the environmental or broadband guidelines. And these kinds of aid are available throughout the whole territory of the EU. For example, according to our estimates, only about 1/3 of the regional fund co-funded aid measures has been assessed on the basis of our regional aid guidelines. 1/3. The rest, the other 2/3, was found compatible on the basis of other guidelines, other sectoral or thematic rules. And third point, capping aid to what is strictly necessary is crucial to prevent subsidy races between member states at a time of tight budgetary constraints. Taking into account the gaps between Europe's regions that, as I said before, have narrowed in the past decade, we propose to lower aid intensities, except for the worst-off regions. Regions should invest in lasting and structural improvements instead of luring mobile capital from one region to the next, creating windfall profits on the way. This is why I decided to strengthen the provisions against aid-induced relocations. Another major element of the reform is a new focus on ensuring the value added of aid measures by requiring that there would be a more rigorous evaluation of the incentive effect of these measures. This means that the aid must give companies an incentive to invest or set up operations in an assisted area which they would not have undertaken otherwise. When well-designed aid measures do this, they can contribute to the economic development of entire regions. However, there are many factors that attract business to a region, and subsidies should only be used when they can tip the balance and trigger new investment and new jobs. Empirical evidence shows that subsidies are not the main reason to invest in a region in most of the cases. Other factors drive investments, such as availability of a skilled labor force, infrastructure, or natural resources. Investment decisions are also a function of labor costs, growing demand, and competitive pressure that pushes companies to modernize existing production facilities. Our own experience in the enforcement of regional state aid confirms these theoretical or academic findings. In addition, a strong body of evidence suggests that the regional investment aid is more effective and efficient when it's geared towards SMEs rather than to large firms. I don't mean to say that large firms do not contribute to regional development. Of course, they do. But large enterprises would often have made the investment in assisted regions even without financial support. Giving subsidies in these circumstances amounts to handing out free money to firms. This leads, in many occasions, to a waste of public resources which we simply cannot afford. This also leads to competition distortions in the internal market with damaging effects on growth. Given this evidence and our own experience, I am proposing to allow regional investment aid to large companies only in the least developed regions, the so-called A areas, where the balance between the contribution to development and the distortion of competition is more favorable. I want to stress that we will continue to authorize aid to large firms in C areas and other regions, provided it meets the Europe 2020 objectives, such as research, development and innovation, or environmental protection, under the respective sectoral state aid guidelines. Another major element of our reform regards the proportionality of aid and the aid intensity ceilings. We want here to strike the right balance. On the one hand, the regions most in need must be in a position to attract the investment they need to grow. On the other hand, the aid must be limited to what is necessary to attract those investments. In addition, in line with the broad objectives of our modernization strategy, we want to simplify the treatment of smaller cases, in particular SMEs, and therefore we will propose that fewer categories of aid must be notified to the Commission. The scope of block-exempted aid, meaning aid that has not to be notified, will be widened and the rules simplified so as to allow a better focus on the most distortive measures and quicker decisions at national level. The rules for block-exempted aid will be laid down in the new General Block Exemption Regulation, which is now being prepared and that I intend to propose my colleagues to adopt it before the end of this year. And finally, I would like to mention two more proposals that will make state aid policy more transparent and more effective. The first requires Member States to publish on the web the main data regarding the aid they grant. This will increase transparency and accountability and corresponds to what is currently done under the structural funds for direct payments or under the Common Agricultural Policy. Also, as is already the case in some Member States, we are considering requiring an ex post evaluation of selected large aid schemes. The aim is to check if the aid has achieved the results that were intended when it was adopted. These evaluations should serve to improve the design of future measures. They should also help to make a better use of public resources. I am convinced that aid granting authorities, of course, regions among these authorities, would benefit from these new transparency and evaluation requirements because thanks to them, everyone will know what the others are doing and be sure that everyone plays by the same rules. And to conclude, let me tell you where we are in the process that will lead to the adoption of these new guidelines. A draft of the new guidelines has been sent recently to Member States, to this committee, to the European Parliament, and to the Economic and Social Committee. And the Economic and Social Committee is also preparing an opinion. The draft is also available on our website, in the website of DG Competition, and I invite all the stakeholders to give us their views before the 11th of March, when the consultation closes. And then, in a few weeks after this closure of the consultation period, the draft will be discussed again. Now we will discuss it with Member States, and at the end of the consultation process, I will discuss again with them. So there will be many opportunities to improve still our draft guidelines before we adopt our final text. The new regional aid guidelines and more broadly the state aid modernization strategy engage all levels of government. This strategy offers a policy platform that national and regional governments can use, and if I may, should use, to give their support to the economy with a genuine European dimension and maximizing our expectation of reaching the objectives in terms of growth and jobs that all of us we are looking for. Thank you very much.